We have Lucas, who brilliantly orchestrated this incredibly dangerous, high-stakes trap at the Memorial Tennis Court construction site. He was wearing a bulletproof vest and took multiple point-blank shots to the chest from Jens. Then Laura frantically finds Lucas lying there. The police are immediately mobilized, and suddenly Jens is a desperate fugitive on the run, utilizing Cassius to fake injuries and desperately trying to evade capture by Harrison. And somewhere in the middle of this absolute whirlwind of chaos, we have Ava, who has been quietly agonizing, practically vibrating with this intense, unmanageable anxiety and guilt over her past ties to Jens. She hears the horrifying news that Lucas is hovering near death. Even if it was a tactical setup, the trauma and the visual of him bleeding out are entirely real, and something inside her just fundamentally snaps. The pacing of her transition from passive, nervous worry to an active, lethal predator was so incredibly fast it literally gave me whiplash. So Ava decides she absolutely cannot just sit still and wait for the authorities to do their job. She taps into those deep, dark mob family instincts, the ones, that legacy of brutal street justice that runs through her veins, and decides to take matters entirely into her own hands. She reaches out to Jens, offering him a miraculous lifeline in his darkest hour. She promises him pristine forged passports, a guaranteed, untraceable way out of town, a golden ticket to slip right through the fingers of Harrison and the rest of the heavily armed police force. And Jens, in all his arrogant, untouchable glory, actually buys it. I mean, I'm totally spitballing here, but why would an international criminal mastermind trust someone he has actively threatened and manipulated? It speaks volumes about his colossal ego. He genuinely believes he holds all the cards in every interaction, and that Ava is just a frightened, submissive woman trying to buy his silence or favor. He thinks he is walking into a simple, transactional handover, completely oblivious to the fact that he is stepping directly into a meticulously planned slaughterhouse. But the moment that keeps replaying in my head over and over again on an endless cinematic loop is the actual ambush at the docks. The setting is this decaying, abandoned, dimly lit warehouse by the water, complete with chilling shadows, the smell of salt and rust, and dust motes dancing in the minimal moonlight filtering through broken skylights. Jen struts through those rusted metal doors, looking incredibly smug, practically wearing his arrogance like a custom-tailored suit. He expects to find a cowering Ava trembling in the corner, eagerly handing over the travel documents. Instead, the camera angle shifts beautifully, and we see Ava lurking in the absolute darkest blind spot of the room, her hands gripping a massive, heavy, rusted iron bar. The sheer kinetic energy of that scene is breathtaking. She doesn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. She doesn't offer a dramatic villainous monologue or a grand speech about vengeance. She just swings that heavy iron bar with every single ounce of terror, rage, and protective fury she possesses, striking him down brutally from behind. The sickening, hollow thud of metal meeting bone, the way Jens just crumples to the cold concrete floor like a marionette with its strings violently cut, it is absolute visual and narrative perfection. Let's do a deep psychological deconstruction of Ava in that exact freezing fraction of a second. How can someone be a ruthless, cold-blooded attacker and simultaneously a deeply terrified, vulnerable protector? It is the ultimate contradiction of her complex character. In her mind, she is executing righteous, undeniable justice for Lucas. She has appointed herself as the judge, the jury, and the executioner, wielding that iron bar as a heavy, rusted gavel. Her internal monologue must be a chaotic, deafening symphony of justifications. I am protecting my loved ones. I am eliminating a monstrous threat. I am doing exactly what the police are too slow and incompetent to do. She is channeling years of harsh survival instincts, reverting to the primal, unforgiving rule of the criminal underworld, where you strike first or you inevitably die. But beneath that lethal, calculating exterior, she is driven by pure, unadulterated fear. She is terrified of what Jens represents, terrified of the unpredictable chaos he brings to her doorstep, and profoundly terrified of her own lingering complicity in bringing his darkness into their lives in the first place. But then again, that doesn't explain the sheer visceral viciousness of the physical strike. If this was purely about protecting Lucas and neutralizing an immediate threat, She could have simply brought a loaded gun, held him at gunpoint from a safe distance, and called the cops to collect him. No, hitting him from behind with a blunt iron bar is deeply, uncomfortably personal. Let's flip to the opposite interpretation for a second. What if this wasn't really about Lucas at all? What if Lucas was just the convenient, socially acceptable excuse Ava desperately needed to eliminate a man who made her feel weak and exposed? Jens had dangerous leverage. He had psychological power over her. Ava absolutely despises feeling powerless more than anything else in the world. By luring him in with the sweet promise of passports and striking him down when he was at his most smug and confident, she wasn't just neutralizing a physical threat, she was violently reclaiming her own dominance. She wanted to physically shatter his towering ego right along with his skull. It was an act of supreme vanity and desperate self-preservation, brilliantly disguised as noble vigilante justice. What was I saying? Oh, right, the immediate aftermath of the strike. The dust slowly settles. The terrifying echo of the iron bar hitting the concrete fades into the damp air, and Ava is left standing alone over the unconscious, bleeding body of her bitter enemy. The narrative notes that she feels a strange, intoxicating, almost euphoric satisfaction looking down at him. For a fleeting, breathless second, she is the undisputed, untouchable queen of the chessboard once again. But that dark satisfaction is almost instantly swallowed whole by a suffocating, paralyzing wave of paranoia. She looks at Jens's motionless form, and the chilling realization hits her. He isn't just a lone wolf operating in a vacuum. He has an entire ruthless syndicate, a heavily armed gang of loyalists who will undoubtedly seek swift, brutal retaliation for this attack. The adrenaline crash she experiences in that dimly lit warehouse must be physically agonizing. She realizes with mounting horror that she hasn't closed the dangerous door. She has just violently kicked open a massive hornet's nest. The sheer, icy terror of his gang hunting her down begins to completely paralyze her cognitive functions. Okay, wait, let me back up, because her very next move is what makes this entire sequence so fascinatingly bizarre. Instead of finishing the job, which, let's be completely honest, would be the standard, expected protocol for someone with her dark family background, she pulls out a phone and leaves an anonymous tip for Dante. She gives Dante the exact, precise location of the abandoned dockside warehouse and tells him exactly where to find the bleeding fugitive. I'm totally spitballing here, but why on earth would she leave him alive to potentially identify her? Is it a sudden, miraculous resurgence of a buried moral compass? Does she suddenly remember that she genuinely doesn't want to carry the heavy spiritual weight of being a cold-blooded murderer again? Or is it a highly calculated, incredibly risky tactical move? By handing him over to Dante, she ensures Jens goes directly into maximum security police custody, where he is theoretically contained and neutralized, while simultaneously keeping her own hands relatively clean, at least in the eyes of the formal law, assuming she doesn't ever get caught. She desperately wants the police to act as the janitors for her messy, impulsive vigilante cleanup. Imagine Dante's incredibly confusing perspective in all of this. He has been running himself absolutely ragged, following frustrating false leads from Cassius, trying to track down a highly dangerous, armed shooter who has the entire city on edge, and suddenly a mysterious, untraceable voice on the line drops the ultimate golden goose right into his lap. Dante arrives at the spooky docks, weapon drawn, adrenaline pumping, fully expecting a massive, deadly shootout, only to find the terrifying Jens laid out flat on the concrete floor with a massive, bleeding head wound, completely incapacitated. Dante has to be standing there, looking at that bizarre crime scene, looking at the bloody iron bar, casually discarded in the dusty corner, and thinking, who on earth managed to get to this monster before I did? It completely, fundamentally shifts the dynamic of the entire police investigation. They thought they were actively hunting a lethal predator, but they arrived to find that the predator had already been turned into helpless prey. Wait, what was the point? Oh, right, the fallout. Because the ultimate twist is that Jens doesn't die from the blunt force trauma. He wakes up, and when he eventually wakes up in police custody, likely handcuffed securely to a sterile hospital bed with a massive, throbbing concussion, he doesn't just quietly confess to his horrific crimes against Lucas. No, he immediately goes on a vicious, calculated offensive. He formally, loudly accuses Ava of attempted murder. The absolute staggering irony of this situation is almost too much to handle. Jens, a man who literally just pumped multiple lethal bullets into Lucas's chest at point blank range without a second thought, is now expertly utilizing the formal legal system to declare himself a tragic victim of Ava's unprovoked brutality. It sets up this incredibly fierce, high stakes, convoluted legal battle that is going to tie the entire town in knots. Ava genuinely thought she was delivering clean, untraceable street justice, but instead, she hand delivered Jens the absolute perfect legal weapon to drag her down into the abyss right alongside him. When you zoom out and look at the whole picture, it is a masterpiece of narrative architecture. A leads to B leads to C, it's a perfect domino effect. Lucas decides to play the brave hero and sets a dangerous trap for Jens. That trap pushes Jens into a panic corner where he opens fire and goes on the run. Jens being on the run violently triggers Ava's deep-seated guilt and dark family instincts. Ava's awakened instincts lead directly to the fake passport lure and the brutal iron bar ambush. The ambush leads to the panicked anonymous tip to Dante, and Dante finding Jens alive leads directly to Jens waking up and pressing severe attempted murder charges against Ava. Every single character's inherent flaw perfectly, seamlessly triggers the next character's disastrous decision. If Lucas hadn't played bait, Ava wouldn't be facing potential prison time for vigilante justice. It is beautifully, symmetrically tragic. But honestly, as much as I absolutely love the psychological depth of this storyline, I cannot stop obsessing over one tiny, infuriating logistical detail. When Ava hit Jens with that heavy iron bar, the basic physics and acoustics of it just don't make any sense to me. Jens is a highly trained, deeply paranoid criminal who is actively on the run from the police. How did he not hear her footsteps echoing in an empty, cavernous warehouse at the docks? Those abandoned places have the acoustic properties of a massive cathedral. A single pin drop sounds like a gunshot, but Ava somehow managed to lift and swing a massive piece of heavy, rusted metal without making a single sound until it made contact with his skull? And furthermore, how did she know the iron bar wouldn't just snap in half from years of saltwater rust? I'm probably overthinking the structural integrity of scrap metal and the acoustics of a fictional warehouse setting, but it just bugs my brain. Anyway, that's my deep dive for today. Let me know what you guys think in the comments.